the Prime Minister wrangled the populists in chief without too much drama. But today, the UK will enrage the US by formally saying Palestine is a state. Kier Starmer says it's a moral duty at a time when some politicians think our values are up for debate.
It's right that we take on the divisiveness. I think many people feel that threatened by it, frankly, and really worried about where our country could go.
More from the Lib Dem leader later, but with us live in the studio this morning, the new Deputy Prime Minister, David Lammy, and the Conservatives, Mel Stride. Will the government's big diplomatic move really make any difference? Husam Zomlot, the head of Palestine's mission to the UK, joins us too. But it's Sunday, so there's always still time for a little bit of sparkle. An Oscar winner and a superstar, Alicia, Vikander and Andrew Lincoln, tell us about their new show. Morning, and with us throughout the show, welcome to the Conservative and former Foreign Secretary, Sir Malcolm Rifkind, Ava Santina Evans, journalist, and screenwriter Jack Thorne, whose series Adolescence has just won 8 Emmys in the last few days. Quite an impressive record. We will start this morning, as we always do, with what is making the news. And the government's diplomatic move expected later today to recognise Palestine makes the front of many of the papers. The Observer showing a bombed-out building in Gaza. The Sunday Times reporting Kier Starmer will claim it's a moral duty. And the Sunday Telegraph predicts there'll be more sanctions too on the terror group Hamas. But the Epstein scandal continues to play out in the tabloids. The Sunday Mirror has a picture of Ghislaine Maxwell in her new low-security prison. And the Mail on Sunday and the Sun on Sunday both splash on an email from the Duchess of York to Epstein. Well, it's a busy news day as ever, but Sir Malcolm, the day will be dominated in the headlines by the government's move to recognise the state of Palestine. You were Foreign Secretary when Britain, for the first time, said there should be an independent Palestinian state, but recognising it as a state right now, what do you think of that move?
Well, I still am a very strong believer in a two-state solution for Palestine and Israel. That must be, and it is indeed the only serious option. But I think the timing of this announcement is rather curious and rather posturing. I think, first of all, Palestine at the moment, sadly, is not a state. It does not have any of the characteristics of a state. So you don't make it one by simply saying we recognise it. But secondly, of course, it gives Hamas the opportunity to say, well, maybe October the 7th was a great success after all. Our act of terrorism has led to this, and it wouldn't have happened but for that. Now, that's untrue, but it's the stupidity of the Israeli government that has brought this about. But that's the way they will be able to present it.
Jack, you're a Labour Party member. Alongside your very successful professional career, do you think it's the right thing to do this? It's been Labour policy to do it for a long time.
I suppose it's what difference it makes. When Medicine Sans Frontières are talking about 11 out of 18 of the hospitals being in danger of closure, when they're saying that they can't get sterile gauze into the country, what difference do words make when actions are needed?
But a lot of people in the Labour Party will be pleased, and a lot of Labour MPs might be pleased about this. Will you be, personally? Will you support it?
Yes, but I agree that it can't be posturing. It's got to be something that actually has an impact on the people that are in the country right now.
Ava, how much of this do you think is about the Labour Party trying, at this moment, to manage the unhappiness in their own ranks? Because there's a lot of restlessness around, and also in the general election, very strong threats to many constituencies from candidates who are running with very strong pro-Palestinian views. So how much of this do you think is politics and how much is principle?
I mean, I think that Starmer almost fell into this, really, because he set these terms out a few months ago and, you know, Israel has not abided by those terms. So it's got the hallmarks of Starmerism in that it sort of happened by accident for the Labour Party. And actually, I don't think this will be enough to quell the concerns of many backbenchers who are at risk of losing their seats. And it's not just because you've got pro-Palestinian voices running in, you know, against Labour MPs across the country. It's also because this Labour Party hasn't held up its promises as set out in its original manifesto. OK, lots to get in. It's a really interesting mix of diplomacy, politics at home and abroad, so lots for us to talk about through the show.
Well, the government got past President Trump's big visit without huge embarrassments, and it pocketed billions of pounds worth of investment for this country too. But there is that one glaring fault line between the unlikely friends Trump and Starmer. As we've been saying, the US hates what we expect the Prime Minister to do in a few hours' time, that the government will recognise Palestine as a country, a formal state. Decades of dispute with Israel means it both is and isn't a country at the moment. It has no internationally agreed boundaries, there's no capital, there's no military, and the Palestinian Authority is not in full control. So long before the October the 7th attacks by Hamas and Israel's bombardment of Gaza, the United Nations and other international bodies argued that peace did depend on creating a two-state solution. And the idea of establishing an independent Palestine alongside Israel, the idea is that could pave the way for that kind of solution. But with hostages still being held, Israel and America believe the move is a diplomatic gift for terrorists. So let's talk about all of that with the Deputy Prime Minister who will speak at the United Nations about that this week. David Lammy, welcome to the studio. And of course, until not so long ago, you were the Foreign Secretary as well. So this is very much issues that you will cover. Can you give us one tangible difference that this move will make to the desperate situation on the ground in Gaza?
Well, you're going to speak to Husam Zomlot a little later, and this is something that certainly the Palestinian Authority have been calling for some significant time. And I think a lot of that is wrapped up in hope. Will this feed children? No, it won't. That's down to humanitarian aid. Will this free hostages? That must be down to a ceasefire. But does this mean that you get or hold out for that two-state solution and stand by the Palestinian cause being a just cause? Well, that was the determination that I and the Prime Minister made at the end of July, when, yes, we urged that ceasefire, and yes, we urged that process, and the Prime Minister will set out the position later on today, making a judgment as to whether those conditions have been met.
But as you've just admitted, it is a diplomatic and a political gesture that you hope may make a difference in the time to come. What it has already done is give a propaganda victory, what Hamas, a terror group, sees as a propaganda victory. They say this is one of the fruits of October the 7th. Why give any bit of good news to that group?
The first thing is we've got to make a distinction between a proscribed terrorist group that's been subject to 3 rounds of sanctions since October the 7th by our country.
Will there be more? Where
there have frozen assets and travel bans. And of course, the government continues to consider further assets. We've already got sanctions against 23. There may
Will there be more as part of this?
There may well be more, of course, in the coming days and weeks. But let's make a distinction between Hamas and the Palestinian people. And what do we say to the children of a future Palestinian state? Do we say we have to wait for the perfect conditions before we can recognise a Palestinian state? Or do we say, when we see the E1 development, the expansion plans the Israeli government now have in the West Bank, when we see the decision not to move towards a ceasefire, but instead to attack Qatar and set back that ceasefire, do we say to them, no, you cannot have that Palestinian state that is your dream? And I think that's the assessment, not just the UK, but France, Australia, Canada, Belgium are making at this time.
But it sounds like you are seeing this to a large degree as a punishment for Israel. And isn't it a strange logic for a part of the world where people for many, many decades have been asking for their own homeland? And isn't it a strange logic that you grant this when much of the place has been flattened and tens of thousands of people have been killed? And then you say, now we can treat you as a real country when there might not be much of it left.
Well, actually, that's precisely why you might decide that it's important to stand up for those two states. If the E1 development goes ahead, it splits up north and south of the West Bank. It runs a coach and horses through Bedouin villages where Palestinians currently live. By the way, when it was first planned, William Hague, as then Foreign Secretary, rejected it and condemned it. So our judgment must be based on what's happening on the ground.
And just to be clear,
and standing by a Palestinian Authority that we are attempting to work with to reform, that we signed a memorandum of understanding with. And Abbas, of course, was in London meeting the Prime Minister just a few weeks ago.
And we will hear from them later on in the programme. And just if people haven't been following that closely, the E1 of development you're talking about is Israel expanding its settlements in the West Bank, which the Palestinian Authority tries to control. But there's another element here, though, in terms of how this will all affect the situation on the ground. And some of the families of those whose loved ones are still being held hostage by Hamas have written to the Prime Minister, more or less begging him not to go ahead. They say this will make it more complicated to be able to get their families home. What do you say to them? They've said so clearly, now's not the time.
Well, let me be clear that I've continued to meet with hostage families, and I met them just a few weeks ago to have this discussion. I think it's also right to say that there are many hostage families who are shocked and appalled that the prospects of a ceasefire have been set back just in the recent days.
That's a different question. The hostage families are saying, some of them are, now is not the time to make this move.
I recognise that, but let me say again, Hamas is not the Palestinian people. A Palestinian state is a just cause, and our country, 108 years ago, signed up to the Balfour Declaration. We believe in a homeland for the Jewish people, but we also stated that we believed in the civil and religious rights of the Palestinian people. And now is the time to stand up for that two-state. Otherwise, you're effectively saying you believe in no state for the Palestinian people or one state, in which you would have to explain how there is proper equality before the law for the Palestinian people. So that is why I think this judgment, this fine judgment, is being made at this time, not just by the UK, by Australia, by Canada, and also, of course, by Belgium.
OK, well, it's a big change in our foreign policy, and we'll hear from the Prime Minister, we think, probably in the coming hours. Let's now talk about something else that the government has been doing to try to help on the ground in Gaza. There are a small group of students, of scholars, are being allowed to come from Gaza to the UK to carry on with their studies. Some of them actually arrived this week. But we've found out that they are not allowed, theoretically, to bring their children with them. But when Yvette Cooper was in charge at the Home Office, she did grant permission for one family to bring their 2-year-old with them. But others now are being told that they can't. And we've actually been able to speak from Gaza to one of those students, Manar. She has a place for a PhD at Glasgow University. She's still in Gaza. And she told us about what's happened, and she's not been allowed to bring her children, who are 3, 5 and 10, with her to the UK. So we'll just play you a clip of what she told us.
Here is my family.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Hello.
I learned this very, very late after completing all the visa steps and pay the visa cost completely for me and my husband and 3 children. So I was told just only days before our evacuation, when I received an email from the Foreign Affairs, from FCDO. I trust that the UK government will take the right decision. So please don't let me choose between my family and my education, because it's impossible for me to be separated from them.
How can the government, in all conscience, extend a lifeline to some students like Manar, place at a PhD, a talented young graduate, but say, I'm sorry, you must leave your tiny children behind? Everybody watching knows this government wants to take a firmer line on immigration, but campaigners tell us we're talking about 20 children here.
Well, look, for months, and since the Prime Minister announced this, we have been seeking to bring Chevening scholars and other students to the UK, to bring children in medical distress to the UK for treatment. It's important to understand that we are actually dependent on Israeli permissions to bring those people out. And that has not been easy to get. I'm very pleased that 34, I understand, have come in the last few days. Of course, it's subject to our immigration rules, and that will be on a case-by-case basis.
But how can exceptions have been made for one family, and then for other families they've been told they can't bring their kids? Because that's one of the things that's creating confusion and distress.
Laura, every family will be different, and I do not know the circumstances of each individual family. But it's right that the Home Secretary makes that assessment. But I also just say what sits behind that is also permissions that we might or might not be given by the Israelis to bring people out. So it's a complex and difficult situation.
But the Refugee Council have told us that this idea is excessively harsh. Oxford University and the Scottish Government have both also just in the last few hours said that you should reconsider for this small number of scholars doing extraordinary things to get them out of Gaza, that they, in this case, should be allowed to bring your children. Might you reconsider?
I don't want to cut across the decisions that the Foreign Secretary, the new Foreign Secretary of it, and obviously the Home Secretary are making, but they will have seen that broadcast. They will no doubt have seen what the Refugee Council and Oxford are saying, and I know that the intent is to bring people to be able to study and not to cause them further pain or hardship.
So the intent may well be that we could see a change. I think there's a little hint there that you might hope for. Let's talk briefly about your brief. You are now Justice Secretary as well as Deputy Prime Minister. I'm afraid we're short on time on a day of big international news, but I do want to ask you about just a couple of things. As well as you telling the Commons this week, it was nice to be back on your brief because you were Shadow Justice Secretary, but now you have the job for real. You're announcing today that tasers can be used in high-risk prisons, 500 across England and Wales. I know there's been a pilot scheme. Isn't it risky to increase the number of weapons being used in our prisons?
We had the most awful attack by the brother of the Manchester Arena bomber at Franklin Prison, in which 3 officers were very, very badly injured. We cannot have prison officers facing these kinds of assaults and attacks. Violence has gone up in our prisons under the last government. Self-harm has gone up in our prisons under the last government. And so it is important in high-risk environments. I was in Belmarsh this week, that both we give our prison officers body armour, that's what they say they want, and I was pleased to see officers wearing that body armour, and that they are equipped with tasers alongside the Parva spray defences that they have, so that if faced with these scenes, they're able to deal with it. That must be right.
And are you sure that it will not make a situation more dangerous potentially? Because on one sense, putting more weapons into a high-risk situation, that could make things less safe.
The officers that I spoke to this week were wanting to reassure me that they don't find themselves in a situation where they're having to use what they currently have. But unfortunately, where violence, where drugs have been present, we're trying to bear down on that. It is important that those officers are not in harm's way, and their loved ones, of course, depend on the state to keep their loved ones safe.
Just finally, there's a story this morning where the Conservatives are calling for there to be actually a police investigation into donations to an organisation that was run some years ago by the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, Morgan McSweeney. Now, the Electoral Commission did investigate this, and that organisation, Labour Together, was fined, actually, quite substantially a few years ago. Are you satisfied that everything was done and above board? I mean, do you think the Tories are just trying to make mischief here, or do you think this should be looked at again?
I think the Tories are trying to muddy the waters. What's the truth of this? The truth is the Labour Party was out of power for 14 years. Organisations were set up, of which Labour Together is one, to discuss policy and to find a route back to power. Labour Together actually have been instrumental in ensuring that we got back to power, and so it's not surprising that the Tories have come for it. But what I recall is that a lot of work went in to find the ideas, to find the approach that would chime with the British people, and Kier Starmer landed on that formula, and I was very pleased to co-chair his campaign.
OK. David Lammy, thank you very much indeed. And come back another time, we'll talk in more detail about your new job at Justice, but thanks very much for coming in today. And next week, we will hear from the Prime Minister himself at Labour's conference in Liverpool. So put that in your diary. It's the Lib Dems' turn this weekend, though. I went down to their gathering in Bournemouth to talk to their leader, Sir Ed Davey. And with politics more about vibes and values these days, his party's trying to grab a bit of that agenda for themselves. And of course, as it's the Lib Dems, of course, there was a stunt. After more than 100,000 people marched in London last week, Sir Ed Davey organised a march of his own in Bournemouth before a little later telling us what being British meant to him.
When you talk to British people, they want a country that's decent and caring, that focuses on giving people much better chances in life and sorting out our economy. And at the moment, when I look around and talk to people, they feel that's not happening. They're worried that the Labour government just isn't delivering, and they're worried about the divisive politics of Nigel Farage.
More than 100,000 people gathered in London last week at a rally organised by the far-right activist Tommy Robinson, and there were Union Jacks and St George's flags all over the place, and many people who were attending may have been feeling they were expressing British values, were they?
I'm sure many of them were. The group round Tommy Robinson, who's from the hard right, and his acolytes and followers, I don't think are. They're into division and, frankly, hate speech, and that's really unpleasant. But I think a lot of people on the march were there protesting about things that Lib Democrats care about. The problems in the health service, not being able to get a GP or not an NHS dentist, or this huge waiting list. They were protesting about the cost of living and how high their bills are. And I agree with those concerns. So as we campaign in communities, we're in touch with, I think, some of those people who may have gone to that march. And I think they hear from us and realise that actually we share their values.
So there might have been Liberal Democrats on a rally with Tommy Robinson?
I doubt it, but I think some of the concerns of the people on that march, if they look at what we're saying, we have the answers to them.
More of your campaigning, more of your own language is being shaped by that debate. You know, you now regularly have Elon Musk in your sights. You regularly talk about Nigel Farage's plastic patriotism, what you call it that. Are you therefore almost using that debate to get onto to get attention?
No, actually we spend most of our time talking about health and care, the environment and sewage, and issues like we care about. We're worried about Trump, we're campaigning for a better relationship with Europe, we're concerned about what's happening in Gaza. But it's right that we take on the divisiveness. I think many people feel that threatened by it, frankly, and really worried about where our country could go. And I think it's absolutely right for us to call people out. Take Elon Musk. You mentioned Elon Musk through the X platform. He's actually, I think, committing crimes. I think if you look at what's on his platform, where you see adverts that he and his team allow, because he's taken away the child safety team, adverts for people who want to show videos with paedophile images. Self-harming, grooming. That's what Elon Musk's business is doing. He doesn't want the regulation that Parliament has passed. He rails against the online safety laws, which are trying to pull him to account. And what Liberal Democrats are saying is actually Ofcom should go after him. The laws are there.
But isn't the point that the laws are there? And Ofcom is a regulator. It's meant to be an independent regulator. And some people listening might think, well, it's not for you as a politician to tell an independent regulator to go after a particular individual.
I think it's for us to bring these to the fore and to have that part of public debate. When Elon Musk comes by video link to incite violence and says what he says, we should not just push back about that, we should expose him.
Other people might listen to that and also look at your decision not to go and attend the state banquet with Donald Trump and think, you know what, that is a gesture. That's gesture politics. You sound like protesters objecting to things or calling on things that you can't make happen.
I actually argued for the state visit for Donald Trump because I think we have to engage with people, even if we disagree with them. And I had originally intended to go to the banquet. And I wrestled with this as an issue over the summer. And the issue for me was the fact that Donald Trump is the one person in the world who could stop what's happening in Gaza, the humanitarian crisis, and he could ring up the government at Qatar and get the hostages released.
But you could have had the chance to say that to his face if you'd gone to the state banquet.
I've had the huge privilege of going to a number of state banquets, I think 6 or 7, in the past, and I know from that experience on a number of occasions, you don't get the chance to speak to the visiting head of state.
Is it serious politics to say, well, I'm going to object by not turning up to an event? I mean, fresh polling that was shared with us by More in Common, the research group, suggests that nearly 2/3 of the public don't think that you are serious as a party. And partly, and you know that I'm going to raise this because you marched with a band into conference, partly that is because of your stunts, which were very successful at getting attention for you during the general election and then the local council election campaigns. But this is a serious point because 61% of Britons say that your stunts make the party look less serious. And even current Lib Dem voters have told pollsters, 47% of them say that the stunts are inappropriate. Isn't it time to retire the gimmicks if you want to be taken more seriously?
Well, listen, I'm not sure I've said this to you before, but what I do strongly feel is you don't have to take yourself too seriously as long as you take the voters seriously, and we do.
So you're not going to retire the wetsuits anytime soon?
Well, I was disappointed actually. I didn't have a wetsuit on in the marching band, but it was really good fun. And you know what? There's a serious point here. I think that politics can be a bit depressing at the moment, a bit divisive, and I think a little bit of joy is not a bad thing, a bit of a smile.
While you were out with your marching band this morning, some female Lib Dem activists were stopped from having a debate they wanted to raise at conference about trans rights. Why are you afraid of the conversation?
Well, we're not, and that's why in our very last conference earlier this year, we had a full debate on LGBT plus rights, including trans issues. The question should go to other parties. Have they debated it? We have. This year, in a really thoughtful way, where both sides of the argument were heard, we have debate from all sides, unlike other parties.
Well, that's not what some of your activists think today, though. They think they were shut down and they're cross.
Well, I'm sorry if they're cross, but I do think the truth is what I'm saying, is that we abide by the law. There was a motion that I wasn't part of to move on to next business, but given that we debated these very issues just a few months ago, I think it's quite reasonable to say that we're the only party engaging with these issues.
And lastly, we've learned that the small number of students who are due to come to the UK from Gaza have been told that they can't bring their young children with them. Now, this has come as a surprise to some of them, and some of them are now considering whether or not they ought to stay in Gaza rather than come here to study. So we've been told that the government's position is that those students coming from Gaza, a small number, will not be allowed to bring their young children with them to the UK. Do you think that's the right thing or the wrong thing? And would you urge the government to think again?
Sounds like the wrong thing to me. Liberal Democrats have always supported family reunification. I think any reasonable person would expect people to have their children with them, the mother and the father to have their children with them. And it surprised me that this may sound like another failure of the Home Office.
So Ed Davey, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Ed Davey, who I think it's fair to say absolutely loves going to his party conference every single time. He always looks overjoyed to be there, which is not always the case for all politicians. Jack, we were talking about divisions and the kind of thing that Ed Davey, you can see him, he says on principle, but also this political advantage he thinks in saying, I'm going to reclaim the flag. One of his colleagues even wrapped himself up in a Union Jack on stage last night because he says a lot of people feel worried about division. Do you feel worried about division? I mean, in your writing, everyone saw adolescence. You're almost like reporting on the state of modern society, but is division one of the things that gets to you?
Yes. I mean, I'm a screenwriter, so I'm not going to claim knowledge of how the entire United Kingdom works. But yes, I am worried about it, and I do think that social media has exacerbated something, and I don't think we've got a handle on how to deal with that social media right now.
And when you look at how politicians are trying to handle it, I mean, the Prime Minister's writing about it in one of the papers this morning, saying we must reject division and decline. Do you feel that our mainstream politicians have got a handle on this?
No, and I think Ed Davey's right to point out that what's fueling it is not necessarily the things that they think are fueling it, and that if we were to look after our people a little better, maybe we wouldn't be having this problem. I think the PIP debate showed a country that didn't quite know how to help people, and some of the stuff the Labour Party said was pretty disgusting around that point, and I wish they hadn't. So
even as a Labour member, you were uncomfortable with how they were talking about welfare and benefits at that moment?
Oh, very, very much so, and the damage that's been done to disabled people over the last 14 years has been extraordinary, and the fact that the Labour Party haven't been trying to solve that damage but actually exacerbate it is really, really troubling.
Malcolm, you've been a politician, with many decades of experience, I hope you don't mind me saying, and when you look at what's happening in 2025 and mainstream politicians talking about division and saying it must be rejected and they are trying to sort of recapture the flag almost, do you think actually things are there's more jeopardy than in previous times?
Well, I think division can be interpreted in two different ways. The fact that politicians disagree with each other on matters like education or foreign policy or taxation, that's the stuff of democracy. That's why the public have a real choice when an election comes. Who do they prefer? But what has been an undoubted development more recently, and particularly in the United States, but also to some extent in our own country, is where you adopt an extreme position where your political opponent is not just wrong, but is evil, is bad, is sinister, and that there's no opportunity for civilized debate or an attempt to find whether there are acceptable compromises. That is something it existed in the past, but it's getting worse, and I primarily would say that Donald Trump is responsible for that in terms of the United States, but there are echoes of it in our country as well.
Do you worry about that in your own party, in the Conservative Party?
Not yet, no. I mean, I think there was during the Brexit period, when people took such strong, passionate views, either to remain or to leave, that some of the arguments that were made were frankly dishonest, some of the so-called advantages of leaving or the terrors of staying. So I think that was a particularly bad period. I think it also depends on the personality of the political leader.
Well, let's talk about that then, Eva. So Kier Starmer, his personality, and somebody who very much sold himself to the public as I am steady and capable and competent and calm. Do you think that he is struggling in the polls partly because he's struggling to communicate in this very, very noisy world?
I think he doesn't quite know what to do. I think that sort of sounds like an oversimplification, but I think he's sort of running around attempting to please many different factions and trying to put out fires, that he's actually not ahead of the game and he's not quite sure. You know, many times I go on panels and I'm asked to define Starmerism. I have no idea what it is. I thought I had a general feeling about it just before the election. None of that has proven true. I mean, look at the lack of expenditure. Look at where money is going to. It's going to wars that they promised it would never go to. You know, none of it has rung true. It's very, very tricky because it just sounds like an oversimplification, but I simply do not know what the intent is.
But in terms of things like spending has gone up significantly since the Conservative administration. Taxes also have gone up very significantly. But do you think...
But not the taxes that he promised. I think there was a sort of a feeling in the backbenches of the Labour Party that there would be some sort of wealth tax, that there would be a rise properly in capital gains. It was very insignificant, that rise. That there would be a rise in digital services tax. None of that rung true. And the expenditure actually went on things like, for example, expanding, you know, our warships and our war effort and that sort of thing, rather than on housing and rather than on infrastructure. I mean, where on earth is any of the Green Plan that we were promised so vehemently just before the election?
When it comes to debates, they are often very binary. You know, either you spend more or you spend less. And one of the things that you've been touching on just there, Michael, is the tone of the debate. And often, Jack, when it comes to the debate about Gaza, it gets very binary and very aggressive very, very quickly. And there's sort of no room for nuance. You know, we often sometimes have panelists who say, I deplore what some of the Israeli leadership is doing, but at the same time, I also deplore what happened in the first place. And do you worry about the binary notion of the debate sometimes?
Yes, and obviously what Hamas did on October 7th is extraordinarily awful. But what is happening in Gaza at the moment is horrible. And we need a solution to that problem. And the problem is that when you talk about recognition or any of these things, it doesn't ever seem to be about what the solution is. I know that Natalie Roberts, who's the executive director of MSF, of Médecins Sans Frontières, has been trying to get a meeting with the Foreign Secretary for 2 years. And this is a group that have got 1,000 doctors in the country, 1,000 medical staff in the country, sorry, and they have knowledge of what is happening on the ground, and they are not being brought into what is a very, very tricky situation, and they're not being asked for solutions to the problem.
Malcolm, what could the solution, though, be? So, you know, you're one of the people who's expressed concern about whether or not recognition will make any difference, and it has given a propaganda boost to Hamas. Jack there is telling us that, you know, medics are really struggling on the ground. We all see on our television screens how appalling the situation is. But with your experience as a Foreign Secretary of many years, what on earth is the way out of this?
Well, we have to make a distinction between the Israeli government and Israel as a country. And what we saw, which is very heartening, is over 500,000 Israelis in a country of 9 million out on the streets demonstrating against Netanyahu. So there's a huge... And Israel remains a democratic country with the rule of law. Its courts actually can overrule governments there. And that's very, very impressive. They're due to have a general election probably 9 months from now, and all the evidence Netanyahu will lose. Now, so the question is how you handle the period up until then, hoping that a change will come from on that basis. I have to say, the key is Donald Trump. He is the only person at this moment in time that can so threaten, in a constructive way, but threaten Netanyahu unless you terminate this war and get Hamas to release the hostages, then we cannot continue to supporting you. The moment, it seems to be that he takes unjustified credit for ending all wars, except the one that his own intervention would make a substantive difference to on Gaza, and that he's refusing to do.
It's a very precarious position, for sure. Thank you very much, all three of you, for now. Well, to recognise or not to recognise Palestine as a state divides our politicians, but it will be welcomed by many of those, as we heard David Lammy earlier, arguing for that elusive two-state solution, the hope that in the end, two states can live peacefully side by side. At the moment, the Palestinian political leadership is divided between the Palestinian Authority that runs the West Bank, and then, though the Israeli government, as we've heard, has been expanding settlements, and some ministers even calling for annexation, and then its militant Hamas opponents who ran the Gaza Strip until Israel's invasion. So it is a complicated position, but I'm pleased to say Husam Zomlot, who represents the Palestinian Authority here in the UK, is with us live this morning. Welcome to you. If the UK announces recognition of Palestine later today, which everybody expects, what would that mean for the people you represent?
It would mean a lot, but what would it mean to the people of Britain? And Britain, that's the most important question, because this is more about Britain than it is about Palestine. Palestine existed long before the Balfour Declaration. Palestine existed long before Israel. Palestine is the cradle of civilization, the birthplace of Christianity. So we existed. The issue today is ending the denial of our existence that started in 108 years ago, in 1917. And I think today the British people should celebrate a day when history is being corrected, when wrongs are being righted, when recognition of the wrongs of the past are beginning to be corrected, and when taking responsibility of that colonial era, because that era has led us directly to the genocide in Gaza today, and that era has led to the ethnic cleansing of 2/3 of the Palestinian people during the Nakba and during the British Mandate. So today, we welcome such a historic step, and historic because, as Secretary David Lammy said in the UN in July, the hands of history is on our shoulders, meaning that the hands of British history on this whole conflict. So, of course, we will welcome it, Laura. And, of course, this is a step forward in the direction of peace, in the direction of justice, and in the direction of ending the erasure and the genocide.
But there are other people in this country, and there are British families with links to hostages being held by Hamas, who have begged the British Prime Minister not to go ahead with this, who have said this is a propaganda gift for Hamas. What do you say to them?
They're wrong. They're very, very, very wrong.
Well, this is what Hamas
They should not play in the propaganda machine of Benjamin Netanyahu, Smotrich and Ben Gvir, the most fanatical government of Israel.
Those are the families of hostages who've been taken by Hamas. And I'll just read our audience. This is what a Hamas official said in August. They said, the initiative to recognise the Palestinian state is one of the fruits of October the 7th. Now, that is clearly, from Hamas's point of view, them saying, yes, we have achieved something here. We have got countries to give us something what we want as a result of their appalling actions on October the 7th. And that's what hostage families are referring to.
I don't know what hostage families you're referring to. I know many hostage families who are bitter about Netanyahu for actually insisting to keep the war at the expense of their kids and at the expense of their family, at the expense of their family members, because of very personal, narrow calculations by Netanyahu himself. He's dodging courts.
But Mr. Zomlot, forgive me, this is a different question.
But the majority of the families of the hostages want to see a ceasefire. 500,000 of the Israelis were in the streets.
I'm not asking you about the ceasefire. I'm asking you about the recognition of a Palestinian state. Some families of hostages, and also many politicians, we've heard that from Malcolm Rifkind here this morning, a foreign secretary of many years, there are many people who believe that giving Palestine statehood today, at this moment in this conflict, does give a propaganda win to Hamas.
No. What they're saying is propaganda. What does 7th of October Hamas has to do with the Palestinian right to self-determination? May I ask you, Laura? This right to self-determination, the right to exist on our homeland, has come long before Israel, long before Hamas. This is an inalienable right of the Palestinian people, a birthright, long overdue. And the question is never, why should the UK recognize the state of Palestine? The question is, why didn't the UK recognize the state of Palestine all this long? Why it persisted to deny the Palestinians inalienable right to self-determination? And I quote Sir Kier Starmer here, the Prime Minister, recognition is not a gift, it's not a favor, it's an inalienable right, it's not a reward, it's not a punishment. Every act to try and argue otherwise about recognition is an act that serves Netanyahu, the maximalist, the ones who want to erase the Palestinian people, the ones who want to ethnically cleanse our people from the West Bank. This is a moment when we build an acknowledgement about the wrongs of the past, an acknowledgement that the genocide must end, and act to end it via sanctions and accountability and arms embargo, and an embrace towards the future. So we build it together and we move in a different direction than the crazies of Netanyahu's and Smotrich and Ben Gvir.
Is not, though, the Palestinian Authority too weak for this process to proceed? You haven't held elections for years. There's very widespread evidence of corruption in the Palestinian Authority. Is it in any kind of condition actually to proceed here?
We're one of the few countries who have been convening elections. We even convened the last elections and Hamas won, and it was actually handed power. This is not about elections. This is not about our behavior. And I have to say, we are absolutely committing to the democratic renewal and to elections as soon as the genocide ends. This is not about our behavior, Laura. This is about our existence. We better behave. We have to continue on the democratic process, on a state that protects its people like any other state. We have to end this exceptionalism about Israel and exceptionalism about us. We will be just like any other democratic state. But think with me. How can you convene elections in the middle of genocide? How can you convene elections while settler terrorism and settler terrorists are rampaging in the West Bank? How can you convene elections when you have now 1,200 roadblocks, checkpoints, making the West Bank cities more of ghettos rather than cities, completely in cycle? How can you convene elections when Israel refuses your people in Jerusalem, 350,000, to take part in that democratic process? Okay. So democratic process under military occupation is not perfect. Okay. We need to focus on the root cause, on ending the occupation, on establishing a sovereign state of Palestine. And that's why recognition is foundational step towards that. And anybody who argues against that is somebody who wants to see us moving backward rather than forward. OK. Mr.
Zomlot, thank you very much indeed for coming in. It's been great to have you with us in the studio on a major day for what happens next in the Middle East. Thank you very much indeed. And of course, the UK government does not yet accept that Israel has carried out genocide in the conflict of the last few months. The United Nations have found that that is the case in a major report not so long ago, but the UK position at this stage is not to accept that. Remember, of course, as ever, we want to know what you think. Email us, kuenssberg@bbc.co.uk, or if you're social media inclined, you can use the hashtag #BBCLauraK and the WhatsApp number 08000 282 161. All that information is up there for you now. This is a passionately debated issue, whether or not Palestine should be recognised formally as a state, and the Conservatives do not agree with the government's decision. They side with Israel and the American position. And Mel Stride, the Shadow Chancellor, is joining us for the Conservatives this morning. If you believe in a two-state solution, as your party does, isn't it, as Mr. Zomlot was arguing, actually essential to recognise Palestine as a state?
So what we need to do is take the actions that will accelerate us towards that outcome that I think we can all agree on. But actually recognising Palestine at the moment is going to do nothing to get more humanitarian aid into Gaza. It's not going to do anything to help free the hostages. It's not going to do anything, in fact, to move us towards that particular outcome. And the reason is, Laura, that you have to use leverage at certain times in those kind of circumstances. And it seems to me that to simply say we are going to now recognise Palestine is not applying any leverage or getting anything in return for any of that. And if you ask that, just very quickly to finish, if you ask the question, well, therefore, why has the Prime Minister done it, it's more to do with the internal politics of his own cabinet and his backbenchers and the pressure that he's receiving, and that is not a good basis on which to conduct foreign policy.
But when an Israeli minister was talking about carving up Gaza as a real estate bonanza, isn't it actually exactly the moment for the international community to say, no, Palestine is and ought to be a state, and to do this formal recognition? Isn't it exactly the moment?
Well, at the moment, as Malcolm Rifkin was saying earlier in your programme, there is no recognised international borders for a Palestinian state or indeed a capital. And in that sense, it's premature as well. But I come back to my point, which is that surely you make these moves at a point where you can exercise some leverage as part of a process that we're a long way towards the start of rather than the finish, of ending up with a situation where you have a secure Israel and you have a sovereign Palestinian state peacefully living alongside it. You don't just do what your party pressures you into doing, which is what this Prime Minister is doing, rather like a cork on the tide, just drifting in whichever way he's pushed. That's not the basis of conducting sensible foreign policy. OK.
Well, we heard Davey a few minutes ago really condemning Elon Musk, the tech billionaire, and he's also condemned your leader, Kemi Badenoch, as cowardly for refusing to condemn what Elon Musk said at a rally, or said to a rally in London, I should say. He said, violence is coming and you either fight back or die. Do you condemn those remarks?
So those are certainly not words that I would personally have used, not least in those particular circumstances. And it is a fine line, as we know, between free speech and saying things that are, beyond unlawful, for example. So I think he was the right side of that boundary, in my opinion. But they are not words. Well, they're not words. Everybody has their own way of expressing what they feel about things, and my way of expressing it is to say they are certainly not words that I would have chosen to have used.
But previously, when you were running as leader, actually, you condemned how people sometimes run populist politics. You said we mustn't set one group another. We must not trade on negativity and division.
Yes.
So maybe you should.
Well, I stand by that, and that's exactly why I've given you the answer that I've given to the question as to what I think about the remarks that he made. I think they were inappropriate, and I wouldn't have used those words.
Your former colleague Liz Truss told Newsweek that the far-right activist Tommy Robinson, who's been convicted of multiple crimes, has been unfairly demonised. Is she still welcome in the Tory party? Well, those are matters for Kemi Badenoch and the leadership, but that is once again something that I would not have been saying. I think Tommy Robinson, who is somebody who has served time in prison for various misdemeanours along the way and conducts his politics in a way that is a very long way from the way in which I believe politics should be conducted, and is part of the far right that I don't want to have any truck with. So I don't think I'd be saying what Liz Truss said on that occasion. And just briefly, on another matter, the Conservatives this morning calling for a police investigation into the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff. The Electoral Commission has already investigated that issue and fined the organisation. Aren't you quite nakedly just trying to stir up trouble here? No, not at all, because we've got new information. So what happened was actually £700,000, Laura, was not properly registered with the Electoral Commission. The Electoral Commission looked into that, and on the basis that Labour Together claimed that this was an administrative error, they levied a fine. There have been 20 breaches of the rules. What we've now discovered through released emails is that the solicitors involved with Labour Together gave clear advice that that kind of approach and the approach that they were taking to registration could be unlawful. And if it is unlawful, under the terms of the Act, that is a criminal offence. Okay, and that's why, as a party, we have taken this now to the police. OK, well, it's a complicated story, but we'll see what happens. It may be, or may not be, one of those things that becomes another Westminster saga. Mel Stride, it's always good to have you with us in the studio. Thank you very much for coming in. Now, if you've had enough political and diplomatic drama, time for some proper stuff. Andrew Lincoln, the star of Love Actually and The Walking Dead, is back on stage with Oscar winner Alicia Vikander in a play that wasn't even finished when they started that rehearsal. It's a modern mashup of a 150-year-old drama, The Lady from the Sea, by the Scandinavian writer Ibsen, with the achingly cool director Simon Stone putting them to the test.
I was with him, That night, on the oil rig.
Stop. No. Stop.
Ed?
No. No, I don't want to hear this.
When you started, the play wasn't written. So the way that the director, Simon Stone, works is basically to write as you go along. What was that like?
I think it was one of the things that did draw me to wanting to work with Simon. I had heard that this was his process, and it was a ride, and it was, you know, the last few days have been pretty intense leading up to it, but it's been absolutely incredible.
You're the first person that I've ever told this.
Then don't tell me!
I killed someone.
No, you didn't.
This is your first play. You didn't have a reference point, and everybody kept saying there were two brilliant cast members who had both worked with Simon several times, and I think that they were plants in the crew.
I mean, he did say it
just
himself.
just to steady the ship when people were going, "We've got 2 weeks left. We don't have a script."
Yeah.
And they were going, "No, we're ahead of the curve," and we're like, "Really?" It sort of was living an actor's nightmare for about 2 weeks when you're just sort of, you know, your worst nightmare is waking up and not thinking you're going on stage without a script.
I think, and every actor there is have had that nightmare. And when we did our first preview, that was the same day we did our second ever run through.
It's so frightening.
Of the script.
So I kept saying to you, I went, this is really not normal. What's happening here?
Tell us about your character and the journey that she goes on, because she has present love, past love, all sorts of things going on.
She's kind of hit by this event and trauma that happened to her at a very young age, and also a previous love that suddenly knocks on the door. This event makes her kind of step out of herself and see the reality. She gets to figure out herself and what her journey ahead will be.
And in terms of Ibsen, I mean, when this was written in first stage, 150 years ago, right then, it's like big feminist statement.
It was radical for its time. He was the first time that he was staging modern people's lives on stage. It wasn't gods or kings. It was, you know, people that were recognizable to the audience going to the theatre.
And relationships.
Absolutely.
The complexities of relationships between men and women, and sex and marriage and things that back in that time people were not comfortable talking about in public.
Yeah.
A very, very different experience for audiences, and also for you as an actor. You were in America doing The Walking Dead, which, if people haven't watched it, it's one of the biggest TV series ever that has been made, an absolutely massive smash. And I think you did 9 seasons?
I did, yeah.
You seem so excited about what you're doing in this moment. Do you ever think, oh, actually, why did I do 9? I could have pulled out of Rip Grimes after 4 years or 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, I never look back like that. And I just loved it. And I loved working out there. And I have so many dear friends in America, and I believe in America. And it was just a thrilling experience. There were 250 people in Atlanta, Georgia that I loved dearly and felt an enormous responsibility to. You know, I felt like I was a CEO of a major corporation when you're charging this Leviathan through a cultural sort of thing. I sort of was tired when I got home, and so it's been lovely to sort of do just 2 or 3 different things that have made me remember why I became an actor again.
Would you ever go back to it? Because it was a huge part of your life.
Yeah, well, there's a conversation happening right now, but I'm really enjoying working with this lovely lady here and this brilliant cast, and it's lovely to sort of shake it up and do different things.
And you've done so many different things. One of the things that you've done is appear on Jimmy Kimmel's show. So I have to ask you what you think of what's happened this week.
I think it's terrible that anyone has been taken away from, you know, we need to have freedom of speech.
Andrew, you spent a long time in the States. I mean, do you think about what's going on over there to the people that you know and care about who you used to work with?
Yeah, it's very difficult because I'm not American to comment on that, but I do know that it's, but I believe in America. I really believe in the tenets of American society. I admire it. And, you know, it will, you know, we will survive, you know, people, places and things, I think.
Let's come back then to the play. If there was one thing that you could say to people that would demonstrate to them why you think this is an important production, an important piece of work, what would it be?
I think the two extraordinary young women who play my daughters in this show are remarkable. Gracie Oddy-James and Isabel Akwadike. And Isabel's got an extraordinary speech that made me punch the air when she...
I think we all cried quite a few times
and it's,
during
well,
rehearsal.
It's lovely to see a modern family on this stage, and she gets to say something that is rather beautiful and profound. And you know, when there were people marching, not a weekend ago, we sort of all huddled down together, and I just said, look, we're in direct opposition to that with what we're trying to put out into the world, and I think we should be very proud of what we're making.
And do you feel that's then a responsibility that you have to make that kind of statement?
I don't think it's a responsibility. I have a responsibility to the cast members in a play, you know, and to do the best I possibly can for the play, and, you know, hopefully move people and, you know, bring a bit of entertainment and hopefully educate people. I mean, all of the reasons I became an actor, you know, were because of theatre and going to the theatre and seeing live performance. Yeah, I think it's a good thing we're trying to do here.
Great. Alicia and Andrew, thank you so much for speaking to us.
Thank
it's been a
you
real
so
pleasure
much
to hear about it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, interesting there to hear them talking about freedom of speech. And of course, this week, Jimmy Kimmel, the American TV shows, was taken off air, which is a huge showbiz story in America. And you had a big showbiz time in America this week, Jack, with clearing the board at the Emmys. I think we can show some people pictures of your huge triumphs there. There's the actor Stephen Graham, and there you are with them posing with your trophies. But do you feel that freedom of speech, I mean, we know it's happening in America, there's concern about over there, but do you feel that about what's happening here?
Happening here?
Yeah.
I mean, I think what is happening in America is a systemic problem, which is the interests of the media as a separate institution which is supposed to provide a check to government is being undermined by the commercial imperatives of their organisation. I think that is happening here. It's happening even at the BBC with, you know, your charter renewal. You know, that how you navigate the pressures of government on this organisation is crucial, and it's very, very difficult. And I don't think the government is helping it. I think the BBC should be much more separate from the government than it is. And yeah, and that's certainly true of other institutions too.
And in terms of your new drama, you're writing about the hacking scandal, I believe.
Yes. The Hack, it's called. It's on ITV this week, and it is looking at the history of what happened in the hacking scandal, and particularly the response of press, the police, and politics to what they were seeing, and it spoke to not necessarily complicity between these organisations, but certainly a complacency as to the expectancy, how they should be performing and how they failed to perform because they sort of folded in behind Murdoch.
We'll look out for that. Very briefly, Ava and Malcolm, I mean, you know, there's suggestions of politicians, some of them are trying very hard to make freedom of speech an issue in this country, but here in this studio every week we sit and we talk about whatever we want to, as long as we're within the law. Ava, do you think people actually have a serious concern here, or is it politicking?
Well, if you look at America, it's full-blown McCarthyism what Trump is doing to Jimmy Kimmel at ABC. That is the red scare all over again. And here you are pressured. Look at Mandelson. Look at his involvement with Epstein. Many journalists were frightened to talk about Mandelson for the longest time for fear of being shut out from Labour comms.
Malcolm?
In a free society, freedom of speech is something we've enjoyed for many, many years. It's not that difficult because freedom of speech doesn't mean you can say exactly what you like. We've had laws of defamation for well over 100 years, and if you incite violence, it's right that you should be prosecuted. So common sense is the criteria that should be applied, not trying to get absolute standards.
Well, we like common sense and freedom of speech every week here in this studio on Sunday. Thank you all three very much indeed for being with us today. Thank you most of all, of course, to you for watching at home. And next week we will be joined live by the Prime Minister, Sir Kier Starmer, at the Labour Party conference in Liverpool. Do let us know what is on your minds as we get ready for that encounter, because you, of course, our viewers, you're the ones who really matter. I look forward to seeing you next week, same time, if in a different place. Goodbye.